Welcome to the Time Capsule, where history's greatest stories leap off the pages and into your world. Today, we're plunging into the electrifying origins of the Cold War, a global showdown that gripped nations, fueled fears, and rewrote the rules of power. If you live for unraveling the past's biggest mysteries, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and join our crew of time travelers. Let's ignite this journey. It's 1945, and the world is catching its breath. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, has finally ended. The Allies, spearheaded by the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, have triumphed over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Cities lie in ruins, millions mourn their dead, and the survivors dare to dream of peace. But that dream? It's about to shatter. The two superpowers emerging from the war's ashes, the United States and the Soviet Union, aren't just allies. They're rivals with wildly different blueprints for the future. The US envisions a world of democracy and free markets, where nations choose their paths. The Soviet Union, led by the iron-fisted Joseph Stalin, demands a communist order, with Moscow pulling the strings. This clash isn't just political, it's a battle for the soul of the post-war world, and it's about to set the stage for the Cold War. Let's rewind a bit. During World War II, the US and USSR were uneasy partners. They shared a common enemy in Hitler, but their alliance was one of convenience, not trust. The US distrusted Stalin's brutal regime, while the Soviets resented the West's delay in opening a second front against Germany. By 1945, as the war winds down, these tensions bubble up at two critical meetings, the Yalta Conference in February and the Potsdam Conference in July. At Yalta, President Franklin Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Stalin sit down to carve up the post-war world. They agree to split Germany into occupation zones, hold free elections in liberated countries, and create the United Nations to prevent future wars. Sounds cooperative, right? But beneath the smiles, suspicion festers. Stalin's got his own agenda. The Soviet Union lost over 20 million people in the war, and he's obsessed with security. He wants a buffer zone of friendly states in Eastern Europe to protect against another invasion. Think Poland, Hungary, Romania. To Stalin, friendly means communist governments loyal to Moscow. The US and Britain, though, see this as empire building. At Potsdam, with Roosevelt dead and Harry Truman in his place, the mood sours further. Truman's less patient with Stalin, and when he hints at America's new secret weapon, the atomic bomb, Stalin's paranoia spikes. The Allies agree to divide Germany and Berlin into 4 zones, but the seeds of distrust are sown. The Cold War's roots are taking hold. Want to know how this tension turned into a global standoff? Stick with us. And if you're loving this dive into history, smash that like button. It fuels our mission to bring the past to life. By 1946, the world's splitting into 2 camps. Winston Churchill, no longer Prime Minister but still a global heavyweight, delivers a speech in Fulton, Missouri, that echoes through history. He warns of an Iron Curtain descending across Europe, dividing the democratic West from the communist East. From the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic, Soviet influence is locking countries behind a wall of control. This isn't just a metaphor. It's the Cold War's defining image. The US and USSR aren't trading bullets, but they're waging a war of ideology, propaganda, and influence. Every move is calculated, every gesture loaded with meaning. The US takes a bold stand in 1947 with the Truman Doctrine. President Truman pledges to support any nation resisting communism, starting with Greece and Turkey, where Soviet-backed insurgents are stirring trouble. This isn't just aid, it's a declaration. The US will fight communism anywhere, anytime. To back it up, the Marshall Plan pumps $13 billion, hundreds of billions in today's money, into rebuilding Western Europe. The goal? Strengthen democracies, boost economies, and make communism less appealing. Countries like France, Italy, and West Germany get factories humming again, while starving citizens see hope in capitalism. It's a masterstroke, but it infuriates Stalin. He sees it as economic warfare, luring nations away from his orbit. Stalin doubles down in Eastern Europe. By 1948, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia are under communist regimes, their elections rigged, their freedoms crushed. The most dramatic moment comes in Czechoslovakia, where a democratic government is toppled in a Soviet-backed coup. The West is stunned, but Stalin's message is clear. Eastern Europe is his, and he's not sharing. The Iron Curtain is no longer just a phrase. It's a reality of barbed wire, watchtowers, and fear. Curious about how this rivalry sparked its first major crisis? Keep watching, and if you are new to the Time Capsule, hit subscribe. Join our community and stay hooked on history. Let's zoom into Berlin, 1948, where the Cold War gets its first real test. Germany's been divided into 4 zones, controlled by the US, Britain, France, and the USSR. Berlin, deep in the Soviet zone, is also split into 4 sectors. It's a city on edge, a microcosm of the global divide. Stalin decides to make a move. He's fed up with the West's presence in Berlin and wants to force them out. In June 1948, he slams the door shut, blockading all roads, rails, and canals to West Berlin. 2 million people are cut off from food, coal, medicine, everything. Stalin's bet. The West will abandon the city. But the US and Britain don't blink. They launch the Berlin Airlift, one of the most audacious operations in history. For 11 months, Allied planes fly around the clock, delivering up to 13,000 tons of supplies a day. Bread, milk, coal, even candy for kids. It all rains from the skies. West Berliners call the planes raisin bombers, a symbol of hope in a starving city. Stalin's plan backfires. The airlift not only saves West Berlin but humiliates the Soviets, showing the world the West's resolve. By May 1949, Stalin lifts the blockade, defeated. But the scars remain. The Berlin crisis cements the division of Germany. In 1949, the Western zones merge into the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, a democratic, capitalist state. The Soviets counter with the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, a communist satellite. Berlin stays divided, a tense hotspot for decades. That same year, the West forms NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance to counter Soviet power. The USSR responds with its own alliance, the Warsaw Pact, years later. The lines are drawn, and the world's now a chessboard with 2 players. Oh, and one more thing. In 1949, the Soviets detonate their first atomic bomb, years earlier than the West expected. Now both sides have the power to end humanity. The stakes couldn't be higher. Want to see how this global game unfolded? Stay tuned and share this video with a friend who loves history. It's how we grow. The Cold War's no longer just a European drama, it's global. Let's jump to Asia, where the rivalry ignites a brutal conflict. In 1950, the Korean War erupts. Korea, freed from Japanese rule in 1945, is split. Communist North Korea, backed by the USSR and China, and capitalist South Korea, supported by the US. On June 25th, North Korean tanks roll across the 38th parallel, aiming to unify the peninsula under communism. The US, under the UN banner, rushes to South Korea's aid, while China and the Soviets funnel weapons and advisors to the north. It's not a direct US-Soviet war, but it's the Cold War's new strategy, proxy wars, where superpowers fight through others. The Korean War is a meat grinder. Seoul changes hands 4 times. Millions die. Soldiers, civilians, entire villages wiped out. By 1953, after 3 years of bloodshed, the war ends in a stalemate, with Korea still divided at the 38th parallel. The demilitarized zone, or DMZ, becomes one of the most fortified borders on Earth. Korea shows the world what the Cold War's about. Neither side will back down, and they'll bleed other nations to prove it. The US learns a lesson, too. Communism's spread won't be stopped easily. The Soviets, meanwhile, see their influence grow, with China now a major communist player. The Cold War's map just got bigger. But it's not all about guns. The US and USSR are fighting on every front. Culture, technology, even sports. Propaganda becomes a weapon. In the US, Hollywood pumps out films glorifying democracy, while comic books paint communists as sinister villains. The Soviets counter with radio broadcasts, posters and newspapers hailing the workers' paradise. Both sides infiltrate each other's societies, planting spies and spreading disinformation. The CIA and KGB are born, turning espionage into an art form. Every citizen's a soldier in this war of ideas. Then there's the space race, the Cold War's most dazzling battlefield. In 1957, the Soviets shock the world with Sputnik, the first satellite to orbit Earth. It's a beeping metal ball, but to Americans it's a gut punch. If the Soviets can reach space, what's stopping their missiles from hitting New York? The US scrambles, pouring money into NASA and science education. The space race isn't just about exploration, it's about proving whose system is superior. When Sputnik glints across the night sky, it's a Soviet victory in the propaganda war. The Cold War's now in the stars. Loving this deep dive? Hit subscribe and join the Time Capsule for more epic history. Let's pause and zoom out. Why does the Cold War's start matter? Because it's not just history, it's the blueprint for today's world. The US and Russia still circle each other, wary and armed. The tech race, from AI to quantum computing, echoes the 1950s scramble for supremacy. And the idea of a world fractured by ideology? Look at global politics. Red versus blue, East versus West, populism versus globalism. The Cold War's DNA is everywhere. It began with a toxic mix of mistrust, ambition, and fear, forces that still shape headlines in 2025. Let's dig deeper into the human side. The Cold War wasn't just geopolitics, it changed how people lived. In the US, the Red Scare gripped the nation. Senator Joseph McCarthy led a witch hunt, accusing everyone from actors to teachers of being communist spies. Thousands lost jobs, reputations, even freedom, based on flimsy evidence. The House Un-American Activities Committee grilled citizens, while the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, built files on anyone suspicious. Fear of Reds under the bed seeped into daily life. School drills taught kids to duck and cover under desks, as if that had saved them from a nuclear blast. In the Soviet Union, life was even grimmer. Stalin's purges continued, targeting anyone who might challenge his grip. Dissidents vanished into gulags, labor camps where millions died. Censorship choked creativity. Writers, artists, even scientists had to toe the party line. The Soviet state glorified sacrifice, but for ordinary people it meant bread lines, cramped apartments, and constant surveillance. The Cold War's early years weren't just a standoff between nations. They were a clamp on human freedom, East and West. Economically, The Cold War reshaped the globe. The Marshall Plan didn't just rebuild Europe, it tied Western nations to the US economy. American goods, from Coca-Cola to Chevrolets, flooded markets, spreading a lifestyle that screamed freedom. The Soviets countered with their own model, funneling aid to Eastern Europe and communist allies like Cuba and Vietnam. But their centrally planned economies struggled to match the West's growth. By the late 1950s, the US was churning out consumer goods, TVs, fridges, cars, while Soviet citizens queued for basics. The Cold War became a contest of who could deliver a better life, and the West was pulling ahead. Militarily, the arms race defined the era. After the Soviet atomic bomb in 1949, both sides stockpiled weapons. By the mid-1950s, they had hydrogen bombs, 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima's. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, emerged. If one side launched, the other would retaliate, wiping out both. It was a grim stalemate, but it kept the peace, sort of. Missile silos sprouted across the US and USSR, while submarines armed with nukes prowled the oceans. Every technological leap, from radar to jets, was about staying one step ahead. The Cold War wasn't fought on battlefields, it was fought in labs, factories, and war rooms. Let's talk culture. The Cold War seeped into music, literature, even sports. In the US, rock and roll exploded, a symbol of youthful rebellion and freedom. The Soviets banned it, calling it decadent. But kids smuggled records anyway. Literature reflected the divide. George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm warned of totalitarian horrors, while Soviet writers like Boris Pasternak faced censorship for daring to critique the system. The Olympics became a Cold War arena. Every gold medal was a point for capitalism or communism. When the US and Soviet hockey teams faced off, it wasn't just a game, it was a battle for supremacy. Back to geopolitics. The Cold War's early years saw the US and USSR scrambling for allies. The US courted Japan, rebuilding it into a capitalist bulwark against Asian communism. The Soviets backed Mao Zedong's China, which went communist in 1949, sending shockwaves through Washington. The Third World, Africa, Asia, Latin America, became a chessboard. Both superpowers funneled money, weapons, and advisors to win over new nations. Coups, revolutions, and civil wars erupted, from Guatemala to Iran to Vietnam, as the US and USSR played puppet masters. The Cold War wasn't just cold, it was a slow burn, igniting conflicts that scarred generations. Let's revisit Berlin, because it's the Cold War's beating heart. After the 1948 airlift, the city remained a flashpoint. West Berlin, an island of capitalism in a communist sea, thrived with US aid. East Berlin, under Soviet control, stagnated. By the late 1950s, thousands of East Germans were fleeing to the west through Berlin, a brain drain that embarrassed the Soviets. In 1961, the Berlin Wall would rise, but in the 1950s, the flow of refugees was a constant reminder of communism's failures. Berlin wasn't just a city, it was a symbol, a stage where the Cold War's drama played out daily. The Cold War also birthed a new kind of diplomacy. Summits between US and Soviet leaders were rare but electric. In 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower met Soviet leaders in Geneva, the first major post-war summit. No big agreements came, but the spirit of Geneva suggested détente was possible. Yet every handshake was shadowed by suspicion. Espionage ruled. US U-2 spy planes flew over Soviet territory, snapping photos of missile sites, until one was shot down in 1960, sparking a crisis. The Cold War's diplomacy was a tightrope walk, one misstep from disaster. Technology, too, was a battleground. Beyond Sputnik, the Soviets and US raced to build better planes, submarines, even computers. The US developed the interstate highway system, partly to move troops in case of Soviet invasion. The Soviets poured money into science, producing brilliant minds, but stifling them with bureaucracy. Every breakthrough, whether a faster jet or a new rocket, tipped the balance, if only for a moment. The Cold War turned innovation into a weapon, and the world's never been the same. So, what's the takeaway? The Cold War's beginnings weren't just about 1945 or 1949. They were about a world reborn in fear and ambition. The US and USSR, two giants forged in war, couldn't share the stage. Their rivalry shaped borders, economies, cultures, even the air we breathe. Think nuclear fallout fears or the internet, born from military research. Today, as tensions simmer between global powers, the Cold War's lessons loom large. It started with a spark of distrust, and its embers still glow. That's it for this episode of The Time Capsule. If this journey through history lit a fire in you, give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Click subscribe, hit the bell, and join our passionate community of history lovers. Drop a comment. What Cold War topic should we tackle next? The Cuban Missile Crisis? The space race? Maybe the fall of the Berlin Wall? Tell us. Thanks for traveling with us, and we'll see you in the next Time Capsule. Stay curious.